this background, Virgin Blue would support the proposed provision of immunity in legislation for reporting on safety matters as proposed in the Transport Safety Investigation Amendment Incidents Report Bill 2010. However, this would have to be subject to amendments that protect against the use of immunity for industrial purposes or to protect against actions that are willfully reckless, negligent or non-compliant. We would not wish to see legislation protect those that would use immunity for the purpose other than enhancing safety. I noted that there were some questions at the last hearing around airline-related activities being undertaken offshore. Let me say that Virgin Blue's philosophy as a company is that we aim to undertake as much of our activity in Australia, and we are in the process of reducing the proportion of work that we're currently having done overseas. Last month we announced that we would build maintenance facilities in Sydney to provide us with line and maintenance capability for both wide and narrow body aircraft. This would complement our bases already in Brisbane and Melbourne and create around 300 jobs when construction is complete by late 2012. This philosophy, by the way, extends beyond operational requirements, and we're also in the process of reviewing some of our commercial activities which are currently performed offshore. There's been a lot of speculation around the possibility of Virgin Blue pilot cadet scheme, and I'm pleased to confirm that we will be establishing such a program for pilots in Australia. We've not made any formal announcement yet, as we're in the initial stages of planning the program, and there are a number of options that we're considering, including partnerships with other industry players. And may I say at this point that I've had discussions at the most senior level with SkyWest. We see this and other initiatives I mentioned as making a contribution towards ensuring that there is a supply of aviation industry labour available in Australia, particularly for high-skilled positions. Chair, I hope this provides an overview of Virgin Blue's commitment to safety, and we would be very pleased to answer any questions that the committee may have, and thank you for the opportunity to give an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr Bulgetti. We are very grateful for appearance in your team here today. We obviously are concerned about the travelling public having confidence in its airlines to travel safely, and despite the competitive nature of airlines, and I have to confess I wouldn't own an airline if you gave me one, having to compete against the difference globally in labour costs, etc., yours is a mighty task. I've just got a couple of quick questions. And my congratulations in your giving your phone numbers and access out to your pilots. I have to say that's a vote of confidence in the airline. We've had some issues raised so far in evidence, and we understand that Jetstar, for instance, their cabin crew can fly from Melbourne to Bali and then return without arrest, whereas the pilot crew do get the rest. What do your crew do when they fly from Bali to Melbourne?
Well, Chair, we fly from Melbourne to Bali, of course, and both our tech crew and our cabin crew overnight in Bali. We really don't think it's appropriate for our crew to be expected to operate in both directions. It is a lengthy sector, and as you know, some of the times that those sectors operate are not particularly easy flying times. So no, both our tech and cabin crew definitely overnight.
Having made yourself available and asking for feedback from your pilots, how would you describe your relationship with the Virgin pilots as the CEO, and
well, I'd like
have they taken up your offer of communication? And what have you learnt from that communication?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, I'd like to think that my relationship with the pilot group is good. It's interesting because the company is going through a quite significant change in its positioning in the Australian market. And we have a strategy which we call the game change strategy, and it involves all sorts of different changes to the company. And I must say that the feedback that I've had from the pilots since I've started have contributed significantly to that strategy. There are many suggestions that have come, and to give you examples, everything from the way they look and their authority on board, right across to improvements in the operation, and for that matter, even the customer part of the business. And I can assure you I get a lot of correspondence from them, and I'm very fortunate to do that, and I encourage it as much as possible. I think overall the relationship with the pilot group, not just as me, but as the whole management group, I think is much better than it was, and I think it's good. You can always get better, and we're striving, but I think it's good.
So some of the issues we've addressed are obviously training standards for pilots. It'd be fair to say and I'm a wool classer and a welder, and you're just a cranky old trade unionist. But it would be fair to say that generally, I think a lot of people, without naming the airlines, but some of the flag airlines, some of their pilots are happy with they think they've got a good job, it's well paid, they're worried about job security. Another airline, which is a discounted airline, we've taken evidence from, a lot of their senior pilots are worried about the standards of some of the and testing of the junior pilots. And so I just wondered what you thought your reflection was of the training standards of Jetstar pilots.
Of Virgin Blue.
Sorry, of Virgin pilots. Yeah.
My view is that they're very good. I mean, we are a very safe airline, and I just go back to some comments that were made by Captain Murray of AFAP, where, if I remember correctly, he said that VB's, Virgin Blue's training was exemplary. I think it's also backed up by the fact that the Royal Australian Air Force has entrusted us to train for the 737 wedge-tail aircraft, and in fact we continue to provide support, for that matter, to the RAAF. We're continuously upgrading our simulators and our training capabilities, and in fact we are the provider still of the 737 training for the number 2 squadron at the RAAF. So I would answer that question by saying I believe our standards are very good, very high. They are clearly trusted by the Australian Air Force, which is, we believe, a very good endorsement. The issue is, unless you have very high standards in that area, no matter what you do in the airline, it becomes very difficult. We've had a situation recently where we, as you know, have taken delivery of some A330 aircraft, and although they're not in service yet, they will be in a couple of months. And quite clearly, we were very adamant that those aircraft were going to be flown by Australian pilots in Australia for the Australian routes or any other routes they operate. So our endorsement of the local employed pilots, if I can use that term, I think is very strong and won't change.
Without being too specific, or I'll get a kick in the shins, we've received evidence that in some regions of airline flying, pilot supervision, that compliance has become more important than, and I didn't understand that one wouldn't follow the other, but compliance has a higher emphasis than safe flying. In other words, a pilot who, and you may have a technical answer to this, who gives the right answers and ticks the right boxes and says the right things, is compliant, but not necessarily is he flying safe. Do you have any comments on that?
I will ask my Chief Pilot to give you a more technical answer, but perhaps if I just give a general answer, and that is that compliance is very important. Clearly it's a regulatory requirement, and it needs to be viewed as that. But overall, standards and capability are critical. And to be compliant is one thing, but to exceed that compliance is what we really, what you really strive for in terms of best practice and best world standards. If I may, Chair, I might ask our Chief Pilot to explain that in a more technical manner. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Chair, we actually have, I think, probably multiple examples, but one that springs immediately to mind of an exact counter to that argument, where our aim is actually to set our own standards and then comply with our standards being above the regulatory minimum, and in doing so we will achieve compliance with the regulation by achieving satisfaction that we are achieving the standard that we set. One of the specific areas that I think we can demonstrate very quickly that we've led the pack in many ways is with the what's normally called in aviation circles non-technical skills or human factors training, where the regulation has actually lagged in many ways. The industry standard, well, let's just say that the industry best practice has gone well in advance of the regulation, and not only have we actually been consulting to CASA on that on the development of the new standard, but we've actually set out to ensure that the standard that we achieve across our three airlines, Virgin Blue, V Australia and Pacific Blue, is at a standard that we actually would accept as being best practice, and so we're allocating resources and we're training to meet the standard that we desire, knowing that compliance will be achieved as an outcome rather than as a target.
I wonder, Chair, if I can take the liberty of extending that a little bit further. And flying is one part of the safety process, of course. The other part is the maintenance and engineering. And there are compliance standards in that area of the business as well. And I just wonder if I may venture into that space for just one moment and perhaps ask Mike to give an example of, how we exceed the regulatory standards, and in particular, maybe the 190s, Mike?
I guess, well, firstly, my staff will all tell you I have a very clear view that compliance doesn't necessarily guarantee safety, but it's a very, very, very good start. And I think the example John is referring to, only a week or so ago we had a hydraulic failure on one of our Embraer aircraft. The aircraft has two hydraulic systems. One failed, so the pilots followed the standard operating procedures and executed a safe landing in Brisbane, albeit with fire engines in attendance. But overnight we carried out an inspection on the aeroplane, determined what had gone wrong, did a risk analysis and determined that the rest of the fleet ought to be inspected. And as of last night, we've completed inspections on 16 of those 17 aircraft. We had a couple of other minor findings, but I guess the point for John probably is that there was a number of delays and cancellations incurred as a result of those inspections. So whenever we have that sort of incident, we do a risk analysis, and it can be a range of scales. For example, in the Qantas A380 incident, they obviously made the wise decision to ground the fleet. That's one extreme. The other is you might find something that only requires inspection at the next scheduled service, which might mean such a special inspection is scheduled over the next 2 years. But as I say, in that particular case, our determination that it should be carried out quite quickly. We conveyed our findings to CASA, they concurred, and as I said, the inspections as of last night are complete in all but one case. And I might add that one case is our newest aeroplane that delivered only a few weeks ago, so the remaining risk is negligible.
And I think the point is, we didn't have to do that if we just met compliance conditions.
Thanks for that. I with reference to your immunity, the proposition that's been put to us that there should be an immunity legislation. Obviously, you have a robust proposition that anyone can report and not be penalised. So, wouldn't it follow that if that was the case, then there'd be nothing wrong with having immunity, or do you think it would be you'd get silly sort of propositions put?
No, I agree with you. We have no problem in supporting it, as I said in my opening statement. And the reason we have no problem in supporting it is simply because of what you've said. We know we've got a very robust system. We know that it's open, transparent, and everything else I said. So there's no issue with supporting it. But we just want to make sure that the wording is right in the legislation. That's all.
So we welcome we look